We at the Congressional Progressive Caucus Center are a nonprofit organization that works to inform the public about policies that promote justice, that promote equity, that promote fairness. We do this work together with grassroots leaders from across the country, many of whom have joined us tonight on this call, labor unions, organizers, researchers, and policy experts. And we're just really honored to be joined by so many of our amazing partners today. We are so grateful to host this conversation with Presente.org, United We Dream, and Alianza Americas. Our nation's broken healthcare system, broken economic system, and broken immigration policies make the pandemic so much worse for so many. The Latinx community is at the center of the storm as essential workers in jobs that are underpaid with little to no protections as small business owners. Latinx people are experiencing some of the highest rates of illness and death, yet they are far more likely to be uninsured or underinsured than the general population, making it difficult to seek medical treatment. And far too many families who are undocumented remain fearful of being targeted for immigration enforcement actions when they do seek treatment. These are urgent problems requiring urgent solutions, but the policy response that we have seen so far has often left out and done far too little for members of the Latinx community. The original design of the Paycheck Protection Program to help small business owners limited access for the Latinx community. Many Latinx workers found themselves excluded from the paid leave program designed to help people who were suffering from the novel coronavirus or who were taking care of family members who were suffering. And for Latinx people working in frontline jobs, many people found themselves without protections at all that were needed to protect from the novel coronavirus. Mixed status families found themselves left out of the $1,200 in cash assistance, as the CARES Act required a Social Security number to get that assistance. And even in the midst of a crisis, we saw our current administration continuing to pursue xenophobic and anti-immigrant policies. These are problems that our Congress, thankfully, can fix and must fix as it puts together the next coronavirus response package in the coming days and weeks. And we are honored tonight to help bring together this conversation with Latinx community leaders about how this pandemic is affecting Latinx communities and what all of our communities need to make it through this crisis and build back better. We don't want to return to normal. Normal was not good for a whole lot of people. We need to build back better. And we're going to talk about how to do that here tonight. And we don't have a moment to lose. So we're going to get going with this conversation. Thank you again to our partners, Presente.org, United We Dream, and Alianza Americas, and to our special congressional guests for joining us here tonight, Representative Chuy Garcia and Representative Veronica Escobar. I'm so honored to co-host this session tonight with Nancy Treviño, Senior Campaign Manager for Presente.org. Nancy is a fierce advocate and a longtime organizer in the Latinx community, and I'm thrilled to co-moderate this conversation with Nancy tonight. Take it away, Nancy.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks so much for being here this evening. And thank you, Liz, and the Congressional Progressive Caucus Center for inviting Presente, Alianza Americas, and United We Dream to join congressional leaders, Representative Escobar and Garcia, for this important conversation. Again, I'm with Presente.org. I'm from Miami, Florida, where I came up organizing with really powerful grassroots groups, with inspiring young people and families fighting for restorative justice in schools and a range of other issues. I'm now living in the mountains of Southwest Virginia, where I've been hunkered down and keeping safe during the pandemic. Presente is the nation's largest online Latinx organizing group, where we're working to advance social justice with technology, media, and culture. Part of what makes us really awesome is partnering with people like we're doing this evening. Community and connection is near and dear to Presente. And it's what's got us $2.2 billion out of the private prison industry last year. You can look for our work at presente.org and follow us on Twitter at presente.org. This evening, I want to start with a story of courage. I'm inspired by the courage of those who are brutally and unlawfully detained in detention centers during the pandemic and are organizing right now. We know organizing is really tough in this moment, and I can't think of a harder place to organize with private than in a private prison. ICE detainees have gone on hunger strikes in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, and most recently in California's Otay Mesa Detention Center to demand protections during the novel coronavirus. As of last Friday, 57 detainees were tested positive for COVID-19 at the Otay Mesa Detention Center, and they're still organizing. It's this type of courage that I know will get us through this pandemic, and I know we're going to overcome this. As we know, COVID-19 has created a health and economic crisis that's hitting Latinx families especially hard, and underscores the need for us to exercise our power and protect the most vulnerable amongst us. Latinx communities have been on the front line and impacted by multiple issues before the pandemic. Our members at Presente know this across the country and Puerto Rico, and are taking action in this moment. We know our health is deeply tied to our ability to work, and COVID-19 has just heightened this. Agricultural workers have needed safety masks and protections before the pandemic, and we need to ensure that they and all essential workers are protected for the long haul. And we wouldn't be participating with CPC Center without facts. So I'll quickly walk us through a few of the ways in which COVID-19 is impacting Latinx families across the country. Since COVID-19, 70% of Latinx people in the US cannot telework. Latinx people are disproportionately impacted and risking their lives as essential workers during this crisis. In New York City, data shows that COVID-19 is killing Latinx people at 1.6 times the rate that it's killing white people. Nearly half of Latinx people say that they or someone in their household has taken a pay cut, lost their job, or both because of coronavirus, compared with 33% of all US adults. Undocumented immigrants have been left out of recent relief bills, and many documented immigrants fear applying for unemployment benefits may jeopardize their ability to gain legal permanent residency or citizenship. And those are just some of the ways in which our community has been impacted by the virus. I now want to introduce Oscar Chacon of Alianza Americas. Oscar serves as the current executive director of Alianza Americas, the largest Latin American immigrant-led network of organizations in the US. He's an immigrant from El Salvador with decades of experience in transnational organizing and policy advocacy processes from a rights perspective. He's based in the Chicago area. Oscar, you work with immigrant communities from across Latin America and the US, and also with organizers in countries across the Americas. Can you give us a sense of how COVID-19 is affecting your work?
Okay, happy to do so. I was struggling here trying to figure out how to mute, so my apologies. But let me begin by saying that Alianza Americas is a network, as you said, of Latin American immigrant-led organizations from around the country with strong roots and connections with communities in our countries of origin. We are committed to bringing about a better, equitable, and sustainable way of life for our communities across borders. Our primary function is to serve as a common policy advocacy platform carried out by our members and in close partnership with allies in the US and abroad. As the fight against COVID-19 has been unfolding, we have once again learned about how viruses prey, particularly on those with pre-existing conditions that make them vulnerable. This idea is usually associated with individuals, and let me be clear, people of Latin American origin, as it has been said by the two previous speakers, either we happen to be born abroad or in the US, find ourselves at the top of deep disparities when it comes to access to healthcare, education, housing, wage earning, and other critical measurements of well-being that often make us vulnerable indeed. However, when it comes to Latinx communities, the notion of critical pre-existing conditions is also a concept applicable to our entire community. In the particular case of those of us who happen to have been born abroad, and born in Mexico, El Salvador, the Dominican Republic, Honduras, Guatemala, and other Latin American nations, we have been enduring for more than 4 decades of consistent racist and xenophobic attacks, which have successfully demonized and dehumanized our communities in the eyes of so many people. Sadly, many public policies adopted over the past 40 years have codified the treatment of our communities as essentially a threat. For those of us born abroad and who are enduring hardship here, just as it's been described by Nancy and by Liz, it also troubles us to know that we may not be able to send the monthly financial support that we send to our children, spouses, or parents still residing in our home countries. This is an additional burden not faced by the rest of the population enduring hardship in the context of this pandemic. It also worries us to know that in addition to other stigmas associated with having been deported from the US, very often accusing us of being criminals or that we have done something wrong and that's why we were deported, we are now increasingly suspected to be COVID-19 carriers when we arrive to our countries and face all sorts of challenges. In addition to the impact on individuals and families, we are also seeing many local community-based organizations facing daunting challenges, including their potential disappearance because of all the difficulties that they are having to deal with. In our countries of origin, we are afflicted by outright inept and corrupt governments, which are engaged in poorly thought out, often improvised emergency responses to COVID-19. In some instances, authoritarian political leaders are using the response to COVID-19 to grab more power and threaten the little progress we have made over the past few decades when it comes to building democracy and the establishment of the rule of law. However, despite all these somber events, our communities are also organizing actively to support ourselves, to survive, and to do our best to come out stronger from this moment of crisis. It is admirable to see communities pulling together to provide food supplies to thousands of families across the nation and to seek support from all people of good faith. Alianza Americas, as well as many other sister organizations within the Latinx community, are doing our best to resist, to connect with one another, and to advance toward our shared goals to build a better country, a better world for all of us. Finally, I want to invite everyone to check out alianzaamericas.org, where you will be able to find a lot more information about us, about what our communities are doing in face of this crisis here and also in our countries of origin, as well as ways in which you can support this work. I am just thanking all of the partners in this endeavor, and I am very honored to be here with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your work, Oscar, and for joining us here tonight. Now I would like to introduce Congresswoman Veronica Escobar. It is really my honor to introduce Congresswoman Escobar, who is the first woman elected to her seat and the first of 2 Latinas from Texas to serve in Congress. She's a co-freshman representative to leadership, the assistant whip, a representative of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, the vice chair and CHC liaison to the Congressional Progressive Caucus, the vice chair of the Democratic Women's Caucus, a co-chair of the Women's Working Group on Immigration Reform. I think it's fair to say she's a little bit busy. She is a fierce advocate for her community, and I can tell you from having visited her community and visited her district office in El Paso, she is beloved by Texans, and they are so grateful for her leadership in this very difficult time. So thank you very much, Congresswoman Escobar, for all you do and for all you're doing in this crisis. And now I'm going to turn to Nancy to introduce Congressman Garcia.
Thank you, Liz. And I am so excited to introduce our next congressional guest speaker, Congressman Jesus Chuy Garcia. Congressman Garcia has been a progressive voice fighting to improve the lives of his working class neighbors, many of whom are immigrants like him. He is a coalition builder committed to empowering youth and expanding access to quality education, affordable housing, and economic opportunity. He's a member of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, the Congressional Progressive Caucus, the Congressional Equality Caucus, and New Americans Caucus. Thanks so much for joining us, Congressman. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. It's great to join all the folks who are tuning in and participating this evening. And of course, I'm especially happy to join as a member of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. I want to thank the Progressive Caucus Center for convening this forum. And of course, thank you to Presente, Nancy, United We Dream, and Alianza Americas, and my good longtime friend, Oscar Chacon, for participating in the discussion. I'm glad also to be joined by our colleague, Veronica Escobar. So I want to begin talking a little bit about my district so that we can get a sense of how the pandemic is affecting the people that I represent in Congress from Chicago. Chicago is a hotspot, and I want to get into, what people are experiencing right now, how they're coping, and of course, some of the shortcomings in terms of the responses that have come from Congress so far as it relates to the immigrant community and the Latinx community and how it is being impacted. First, I want to just cut to the chase, so to speak, by pointing out one of the shortcomings of our relief efforts thus far, and that is that the undocumented and even mixed status families who may have members who are U.S. citizen or dependent U.S. citizen born children aren't getting their so-called stimulus checks. This is one of the glaring omissions of the measures that we've taken thus far. One reflecting, of course, a majority in the U.S. Senate that would probably be in stiff opposition. But on the other hand, the need for bringing around more of our own colleagues in the House of Representatives to understand that you cannot have a good public health response if you leave people in the population excluded from the measures that are required in a public health pandemic response. Two, jobs. We have seen now various reports across the country where the Latinx community is losing jobs at very, very high rates. In Chicago, many people who work in the hotel sector, in the entertainment sector, were the first ones to lose their jobs. People who work in hotels, people who work in exposition centers, many, many others. And many of them aren't eligible for these checks, the relief checks that I made reference to, because they are in mixed status families or they are undocumented. Also, we've seen that the reduction in hours for many people from our community because of the impact in the service sector in particular, where many of them work. Many of the people who work as essential workers today in many parts of the economy do not have protective equipment to ensure that they continue to do their jobs safely, protecting their families, protecting the people that they are getting goods and services to. So it's another glaring example of the disproportionate impact that the pandemic is having on our community. In addition to that, the rates of infection, people who are either asymptomatic but positive, or who have the symptoms of the virus, don't have adequate access to testing or treatment. The climate of the Trump administration over the past 3.5 years is keeping many people from getting testing when it's available, or treatment because of the exclusion as a result of many of the policies of this administration. Students who now have to transition, who have had to transition to e-learning, are affected because they don't have connectivity to their phones or computers that may be provided by local school systems. And then it's very difficult for many parents, as we have seen in some early polling in the Latinx community, that requires that parents work with their children in home. Many of them are in small, cramped apartments with large numbers of people living in them. So it makes e-learning very hard. The digital divide has also been exposed by the pandemic.
Congressman Garcia, let me just bring Congresswoman Escobar into the conversation, and then we'll come back to you. I'd like to ask Congresswoman Escobar to address as well how the coronavirus is affecting your district and specifically the Latinx community.
Thank you, Liz, and thanks to the CPC Center, to all of the allies participating on this Zoom conference, to my wonderful colleague, Representative Garcia. He's 50% of the Garcia caucus in Congress. So it's great that you all have half of the Garcia caucus on the call with us. And all of you have so far laid out exactly what we are seeing in El Paso. We have a little bit of an added challenge in that we have a significant detained population in ICE. We are the site of the Remain in Mexico policy. We are the site of expulsions now, where we are denying migrants their fundamental right to request asylum. So on top of everything that the Latino community is facing across the country, and I want to say also thank you for this call, because it's really important that we talk about this. But on top of everything that the rest of the country is facing, we are still battling the administration in terms of sorry, my cat just decided to join. We are battling the same awful anti-immigrant policies of the Trump administration, really that have been magnified during this crisis. And I'll give you just a couple of quick examples, but I want to point out why it is important to talk about Latinos in America and COVID-19. And just as an example of how much, how consequential it is for our population, Latinos make up 18% of the population, but we've made up 27% of the deaths. And so it really is hitting us hard for many of the reasons why you all have mentioned, and many of the reasons that have been identified in news articles and news programs. But we live on a border, in the border community of El Paso, Texas, where we're used to going back and forth, where we're used to a really fluid community. But the Trump administration over the last 3 years has really effectively done everything possible to shut down the border. One of those ways has been Remain in Mexico, shut it down to legal asylum seekers. So we have legal asylum seekers who are in squalid conditions right across the border, who are in the American asylum system. Their lawyers, American lawyers, El Paso advocates, are having to go to another country to help their clients, talk with their clients, and they're being exposed to these conditions. I'll give you another example of what's happening. We have a COVID-19 outbreak in our ICE detention facility here, and that outbreak has been caused by transfers. We have a federal government that not only is not protecting people, protecting the immigrant community, but we have a federal government that is essentially spreading the pandemic across America, because they are transferring migrants from one facility to another facility. So everything that you all have mentioned, we're dealing with. And Chuy, you're absolutely right. The digital divide, we have a new population of Latinos in America who are going to fall behind. And what the coronavirus has done really is expose the two Americas that we've been living in for a very long time. One final point before I kick it back to you all. I live in a state that has, it was kind of like a double whammy in Texas. We have a governor that really is completely manipulated by special interests. We are coming into our peak long after many other states and communities have come into their peak. So our numbers are still climbing. In El Paso, just this weekend, we saw the largest increase in COVID plus patients being identified, and all of a sudden the governor wants to reopen the state. So he's bending to the pressure of his big donors, the members of the business community, and he's putting at risk communities like mine. And this, mind you, is in a state that has some of the highest number of uninsured people in America. In communities like mine with that are economically disadvantaged, with the least access to affordable health care, and in a state that ranks near the bottom in testing. We are below testing 1% per capita of our population. So we are very worried about what we're about to enter into. We know this impacts the Latino community disproportionately. It impacts the immigrant community even more harshly.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Nancy, do you want to ask the next question?
Sure, thank you. So we'd like to hear from both of you. What are you fighting for to make sure that the Latinx community has what we need to weather this storm that is COVID-19?
So one of our priorities, and both of us are members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and we've led with a letter that has a variety of recommendations, but specific to our community. We recognize that the exclusion of people who are not eligible to receive the so-called stimulus checks is a major obstacle that is hurting people, that is making it very difficult for them to pay their rent, to pay their other bills, to be able to continue living and in a sheltered situation as they're expected to by orders in their states or their cities. So we recognize that that's important. Also in the next, and we're working very hard as members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, the Progressive Caucus, the Asian Pacific Caucus, and with support from many members of the Black Caucus as well, to include this in the next package. In addition to that, to deal with the day-to-day needs of the community, we're seeking to provide rent relief, but real rent relief that would create a $100 billion fund to provide rental assistance to people who need it. This would be good for tenants, but also for landlords who will have to, even if they receive a temporary reprieve from making their mortgage payments, it will come due. How are they going to come up with the large amount of mortgage that will be due? So it's good for both renters and mortgage holders as well. We think it is critical as part of relief efforts during the pandemic. And then lastly, with respect to the PPP program, the Payroll Protection Program, it's one of the few programs where workers who may be undocumented, who work in restaurants and in other service sectors, if the employer applies for a loan, which gets converted into a grant, if it's used mostly for payroll purposes, they can remain on the payrolls of those small businesses so that they can continue to receive a paycheck, provide for their family, etc. So I would just hold those out as 3 examples of things that we're trying to include in the next relief package.
Thank you. Congresswoman?
And my colleague laid out what we're fighting for very, very effectively. I want to add just a couple of things. I think it's really important to put all of this in context. You know, I want to refer back to my description of the United States as really being 2 Americas, having 2 different Americas. And the vast majority of Latinos, not all Latinos, of course, but the vast majority of Latinos in our country still live in the America that has left them out. And in many cases, that's been by design. The legislation that has passed so far is no different. Leaving out Latinos and immigrants has unfortunately been by design by Senate Republicans and House Republicans. And I'll give you just an example so that folks at home understand the way that they operate. We wanted to make sure as House Democrats, as we were crafting and influencing the CARES package, for example, we wanted to make sure that the $1,200 stimulus check went to everyone, that no one was excluded. Well, you know, there was we know that there's an income threshold, that's different. But everyone within that threshold who would qualify, we wanted to make sure no one was excluded. But of course, the Senate Republicans linked that money, you know, incredibly necessary economic lifeline for people in our country. They linked it to Social Security numbers. So they did it by design. They did it in order to exclude groups of people who are undocumented or in mixed status families or dreamers who have been working in this country, helping build this country, fighting for this country in some cases, and who have been paying taxes. So, you know, that's what Congressman Garcia and members of the Progressive Caucus, Hispanic Caucus, the Tri-Caucus, all of us who've been fighting for a more equitable and just system, we've been fighting to make sure that we include everyone. You know, and one thing that I'd like to add, and I put this request in directly with leadership on one of the leadership calls, and also submitted this to the CHC, the Hispanic Caucus and the Progressive Caucus, so that we would include this in our priority list for the next round. One of the things that I asked for, and we got into our letters of request, was, you know, all of those immigrants who are working hard on the front lines, you know, if you use an example, farm workers in the field who are working to ensure that we get food on our table, not only should they be provided with hazard pay the way all of our frontline essential workers are being prioritized and are being lauded and are being recognized for deserving of hazard pay, but they also should be provided with a path to legalized status. They have earned it. In this country, we have a terrible history of being more than willing to take advantage of the labor and the hard work of the most vulnerable among us. But when it comes time to standing up for them and protecting them and offering them a pathway, this country has unfortunately turned its back on them. So both of those things have made it into the Progressive Caucus and Hispanic Caucus list of priorities. We are going to fight for that. We are, unfortunately, as you all are very well aware, dealing with an administration that has used the most draconian policies, really truly has wanted to create an America that excludes us, and the Senate is not, the Senate, which is controlled by Republicans, is not too far behind, but we are going to continue to fight for those values.
Thank you. And that's the kind of real forward thinking that we are so thrilled to have you leading, Congresswoman Escobar and Congressman Garcia, in terms of thinking of how we don't return to the new normal after this crisis, but how we actually build a more just and equitable and resilient nation moving forward. Something that you said earlier really stayed with me, and I was hoping you could talk a little bit about a little bit more about it, the problems facing people who are in detention right now and who are being transferred and really subjected and being put at risk by our government. What can we be doing to fight back against that? What are the solutions that we should be seeking?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for asking. And you know, many of us have been sounding the alarm about this, the Progressive Caucus included, about the fact that keeping people detained, whether it be through the Bureau of Prisons or whether it be through ICE detention, makes it virtually impossible to stop the spread of COVID-19. And even when I'm talking to folks who, you know, are not compassionate when it comes to these populations, the detained populations, I tell them, look, even if you don't care about the detained population, which we all should, we should care about every human being, especially, you know, well, period. We should care for every human being. But even if you don't care about people who are being detained, shouldn't you care about the prison guards in the Bureau of Prisons and the agents in ICE and all of the administrative personnel that works in those facilities, and then the families that they go back home to and the community that they come back home to? Because as someone mentioned early on, you know, when you can't keep people safe, you can't keep Americans safe if you exclude certain populations. That's not how a pandemic works. You know, a pandemic doesn't just hit certain populations, it's indiscriminate. And what we've seen in ICE detention, and I want to remind folks watching this, is that, you know, people in ICE detention, many times their only crime is coming into this country without documentation. You know, these are not hardened, violent criminals. We have, you know, the vast majority of them are non-violent, first-time offenders in their entire life. And many of them, and per the government's own assessment, upwards of about 80% of them have a sponsor or a family member that they could be released to via alternatives to detention, so that they could self-isolate, so that they could stay quarantined. These are people who are fighting for their day in court, they want asylum, they want to be in this country legally, but it's this government's insistence on jailing them and criminalizing them that has created these conditions. And so what the federal government has been doing has been transferring people. I've learned that when there's an outbreak in a facility, they're transferring migrants out of that facility to different facilities that are below capacity. Well, what you're doing then is you're assuming that because a detainee is asymptomatic, that they're safe to transfer. When we keep hearing over and over and over again, even from Dr. Fauci, from the White House, we know that you can be a carrier of COVID-19 and be asymptomatic. So all they're doing is spreading this throughout communities like mine. So not only is there an outbreak here in the ICE facility in El Paso affecting other migrants, but that outbreak then can affect the ICE officers, the administrative personnel, the people who've come into contact with them in immigration court, the lawyers, the advocates, and then all these folks then go home and expose potentially their own family, or go to the grocery store and expose the community. So it really is very alarming at not just the poor response by the federal government, but in many ways, the fuel it's been adding to the fire.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Nancy, did you want to do the next introduction?
Sure. And thank you so much, Congress members, for joining this conversation. I'd next like to introduce Luz Chavez, a DACA recipient and impacted leader from United We Dream. Born in La Paz, Bolivia, Luz immigrated to the US at the age of 4. It wasn't until her junior year of high school, while she was applying for colleges, when she found out about her undocumented status. Since then, she advocated and joined social justice movements and is now a junior at Trinity Washington University as a National Dream US Scholar, a triple majoring in education, sociology, and political science, and is currently a youth fellow for United We Dream. Luz, you and other DACA recipients have watched as your undocumented loved ones have lost their jobs, are living without health insurance, but have not been included in recent recovery packages by Congress. What do you need from Congress and the administration right now?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Since the outbreak of COVID-19, I've become the sole provider of my household. I live with my parents and 2 younger siblings. They have lost their jobs, and my mother, for example, works for a hotel. And because of this health crisis, they had to close, so my mother had lost her job. My family and I had to cut back and budget on essential items, and it's been a lot of added stress during an already stressful time. While all this was going on, I'm also worried about the looming decision of the Supreme Court on DACA. As you may know, DACA allows me to work and provides me some peace of mind from the threat of deportation. And right now, with the health crisis and the uncertainty of an upcoming DACA Supreme Court ruling, my family could lose their only source of income. And unfortunately, my story is only one of thousands of immigrant families that are affected by this today. And undocumented people have been largely excluded from the COVID relief packages in Congress. For example, people without Social Security numbers weren't eligible for cash assistance. And for me, at least, the $1,200 would have been really helpful for my family to pay for rent and for food. And right now, my family is relying on mutual aid funds and food banks to help us get by. And like I said, I'm not the only one bringing in income I'm the only one bringing in income right now. And unfortunately, it's not enough for us to get through. Undocumented people are also left out of vital-free COVID-19 testing and treatment. And while this is so important for our people, this is also important for the people that are living without health insurance. There's a lot going on right now, and Congress needs to do more to keep families like mine safe and protected.
Thank you so much, Luz, for joining us tonight. And I also want to introduce Greisa Martinez Rosas, who is a DACA recipient and the Deputy Executive Director of United We Dream. Originally from Hidalgo, Mexico, Greisa migrated to the United States with her parents when she was very young. She began organizing in her hometown of Dallas, Texas, in 2006 to help Latinx youth register to vote, so important, and has since become a fearless defender of her community and of people who are undocumented. And she advocates as well for the rights of women. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Thank you, Liz. Buenas noches, buenas tardes. Thank you so much. As Liz mentioned, my name is Greisa Martinez Rosas. I'm undocumented, unafraid, and here to stay. I serve as the Deputy Executive Director of United We Dream, and we are the largest immigrant youth-led network in the country. You know, I have the privilege of representing hundreds of thousands of undocumented young people and our families. And I can tell you that our community right now is facing a lot of uncertainty in this moment. But the honest truth is also that we are resilient in our fight because we know that our home is here. I want to talk a little bit about what's at stake at the Supreme Court. We know that 700,000 young undocumented people, just like myself and like Luz, our lives are in the balance when it comes to the decision of the Supreme Court. And we stand to lose the protection from deportation that we have right now and face the wrath of Trump's deportation force. What's also underlined, as Luz was talking about, is our ability to provide for our families, our ability to have the health care that some of us rely on for us to stay alive. And I want to share something with you. Trump has been very, very clear that his administration is just waiting for the Supreme Court decision to side with him in order for him to enact mass deportation of DACA recipients. And that includes the more than 200,000 of us that are essential workers at the front lines of the COVID-19 response. These people and our workers are keeping us fed. They're making sure that we have the supplies that we need to survive. They're the ones helping us to take care of us when we get sick. And for immigrant communities and communities of color across the nation, the pandemic is further exposing the systemic problems that have always existed. Latinos and immigrant workers have been disregarded despite our historic role in maintaining this country's essential functions. Immigrants like me are at the same time considered essential and disposable by this country. And every corner of this country is bearing witness to the impact of the racism in our society. And I know that the folks on this call and the hundreds of folks on this video understand why it's so important for us to be able to stand up together, because when one of us is under attack, all of us are under attack. And we should all be outraged by Trump and Republicans in Congress who choose to help corporations over people in their stimulus packages. Just yesterday, we saw that Trump said that he would keep aid from the states hardest hit, like my home state of Texas, unless the states remove their policies protecting immigrants from deportation officers. There's a disproportionate number of meat packers that are affected by Trump's latest executive order, keeping meatpacking facilities open. And that means our moms and our dads and our brothers and our sisters and young undocumented people are forced to stay in these factories while also facing the threat of death in their communities and in their own life. And we're showing up because we know that that's our responsibility, because we have to feed our family. And we are calling on Congress and we're calling on Trump to show up for us. That's the least that we deserve. I want to end with just telling you this moment that in the middle of the pandemic, Trump's cruelty and racism knows no bounds. But I know very, very clearly by the millions of people that have flooded the streets across the 3 years of Trump's administration, by the hundreds of folks that are on this call, that we're not gonna give up. That Latinos will and will continue to persevere, that women will continue to show up and feed their families, and that we are doing everything we can this year to ensure that this is Trump's last year in office. And so I'm really grateful for all of the folks on this line, for the members of Congress. We're really honored at United We Dream to work in partnership with you all to push on the inside while the folks on the outside are ensuring that we're telling the stories and creating the urgency that we're here. So we ask you to join United We Dream. You can text stimulus to 877-877 right now to keep up to date to what's happening. We also have put up, as Luz was talking about, a mutual aid fund. It is now time, if Congress and the government and Republicans are standing in the way of us being able to feed our families, it's time for us to make sure that we're providing for each other. And just in a matter of weeks, our folks were able to, like a couple of days, were able to raise $120,000 that went straight to 300 families to ensure that they had groceries for the week. It's not enough. We need congressional and governmental action, but it is what will get us into this moment. So I'm honored to be on this call, excited to continue fighting, and muchas gracias. Vamos a seguir en la lucha.
Thanks so much, Greisa. And I think we have one more question from Luz that you wanted to ask to members of Congress.
Yes. Hi, yeah, I just shared my challenges that my family is facing. I'm the main breadwinner of my family, and I'm going to school full time, yet my family has been forgotten by Congress and excluded from guaranteed testing and treatment for COVID. Representative Escobar and Garcia, how will you use your power in the People's House to ensure that immigrants like me and my family can get tested and treated for COVID-19 without the fears of seeking a huge hospital bill or economic devastation?
Chuy, would you like to go first?
Okay, I thought we might answer in the order that she named us, but sure.
Okay.
I want you to understand, Luz, that I'm an immigrant too. I came here from the state of Durango a long, long time ago, but I live in the barrio. My relatives and my neighbors are also undocumented. Many of our families are mixed status families. So I understand the plight of the undocumented community, certainly of mixed status families across the country, especially during the pandemic. As we continue to debate and to advance relief efforts in the next bill, we are very clear that the only responsible response that Congress can make in this time of the pandemic is universal policies that are inclusive of everyone and not exclusive. So we will redouble our efforts to things that I haven't mentioned yet, in addition to try to get cash payments for everyone, because that should be the case. Everyone who is working should be getting one. They're contributing to the wealth of this country. Everyone should have the ability, if they lose their job, to have unemployment insurance. We also need, by the way, parity for Puerto Rico, the territories and tribal governments in how they will be dealt with in terms of the distribution of resources in the response to the pandemic. And of course, we will continue to work to bring along some of our members in the House of Representatives. We pray and continue to try to bring around members of the Senate to do the right thing by our community. But clearly, we've got more work to do. Both of you have stated what needs to happen to keep our issues front and center, and that is to make ourselves heard at the polls. Everyone who can vote needs to vote. We need to participate in the census. And if the ruling from the Supreme Court should be a negative one, we ought to be prepared to defend all of those DACA members who will be affected by that ruling. Because Trump is losing support, in my opinion, it is important, like never before, to demonstrate all the political power that our community has as our numbers grow. That is how we're going to make ourselves more impactful in the next Congress, and after we have a new president in the White House, and after we have a shot at winning a majority in the U.S. Senate as well.
That is awesome. I just want to applaud Chuy. And, you know, I don't know that I could have said it better than Representative Garcia. I just want to add a couple of things, Luz. I want you to know that the number of members of the House and the Senate fighting for you and families just like you is bigger than it ever has been historically. But I do want you to know, Luz, and so many of you out there listening and watching, Chuy and I are examples of the large number of people in Congress who are fighting for you, and we're not going to stop fighting for you.
Thank you, Congresswoman, and thank you, Congressman Garcia. We want to now turn to our audience who has joined us here tonight, and we're so grateful to the folks across the country who are here with us on the phone, who have some really important questions that they're hoping to ask you both. And I'm going to start with Judith from Texas. So Judith asks this, and Congressman Escobar, I'm going to ask you to answer this question. She asks, stay-at-home orders are important for all of our safety, but for people experiencing domestic violence, they can also be dangerous and they can be isolating. Can you talk about how we can protect people who are at risk in their homes? And I know this is an issue, Congresswoman Escobar, that you have been working on, and would love for you to answer the question.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I'm so glad you asked. Earlier this week, we had a telephone town hall that was focused specifically on mental health and domestic violence prevention. We know that 1 in 5 Americans suffers from mental illness. We know that since the stay-at-home orders have been put in place, that the calls in our state to 911 have gone up by 35%. Those are calls to 911 specifically linked to domestic violence. We have seen some really horrible cases of child abuse. We know there's elder abuse, spousal abuse, animal abuse that's happening because people are trapped in homes. People and creatures, animals, are trapped in their homes with their abusers. During our telephone town hall, the main message that we wanted to share with people was that help is available. It's different. You can't walk into the courthouse and get a protective order anymore, because in communities like mine, the courthouse might be closed because of those stay-at-home orders. But all of this is still available online and via the telephone. There are our local Center Against Family and Sexual Violence is still open and operating. The shelters are still open and operating. On our website, we have links to escobar.house.gov. We have links to resources in El Paso, but if you need help and you need to know about the resources in your community, feel free to call my office, 915-541-1400. We'll connect you to the resources in your community. They are still there. We need you to reach out for help, and there are people ready and willing and able to help you.
Thank you so much. Nancy, I think you're going to ask the next question.
Yes, and this is for Representative Garcia. And this is from Daisy in Oak Park, Illinois. I'm a single mom and I'm currently furloughed. I haven't been able to apply for unemployment, and if I try to get a job right now, I'm going to be risking exposing myself to the virus at work and leaving my 2 kids home alone. My household got $2,200, but that barely covers rent for April, and the rent is due on Friday again. Many of my family members and neighbors got no help at all because of their immigration status. I'm getting desperate. What is Congress doing to make sure our families can keep our housing in this crisis?
Great, timely question. We understand the plight of many workers in your situation. I hope that you're eligible for unemployment insurance and that you'll keep trying. We know there have been problems because the system has been overwhelmed, but getting to the point of needed urgent relief for tenants so that they don't lose their housing is the creation of this $100 billion fund. Could provide a system of rental assistance to people who need it. It's good for the tenants, as I said earlier, but it's also good for property owners so that they can continue to make their mortgage payments as well. So we recognize that one is dependent on the other. I am hopeful and will be working very hard the next few days to try to ensure that this type of measure is included in the next relief package. The Progressive Caucus has been championing this type of relief. The Hispanic Caucus supports it. This would be good for working people all over the country, and it's only the right thing to do by the many people who are renters in the country. They need relief, and they need it now. We're also working to try to have another set of relief checks go out to people because working families need them to make ends meet, to pay their bills, and to be able to provide for their families. So we recognize the importance of that and will be working hard for the inclusion of such measures in the next relief package.
Thank you so much, Congressman Garcia. And after your question where you gave your number, Congresswoman Escobar, for those who need assistance, we have a caller who would ask you to repeat it, if you don't mind repeating the office number.
Absolutely. Even if you don't live in my district, call our office and we will connect you to the resources that you need to know about in your area. My phone number is 915-541-1400.
Great. Thank you so much. I want to turn to Greisa, who is going to talk about what we can all do next to make sure that we are fighting together for a relief package that prioritizes help for all people and does not exclude anyone. So Greisa, let me turn to you on that.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for the honor. So you've all heard from all of us on this call about the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on Latino communities. We know that it's also happening at a similar and larger scale with Black communities across the country. We are facing death at this moment. And the only way for us to survive this pandemic is to take care of each other. In the next stimulus package, Congress must include everyone, regardless of immigration status, no exceptions. So we're calling on all of you tonight to get in contact with your members of Congress. We know where the two that are on this call stand with us. They are our champions, and we want to make sure that we have even more partners as they push for the priorities that we need, and ensure that Republicans understand the importance of this moment. So we want to make it easy for you. I want you to take out your phone right now and text stimulus to 877-877. And that will ensure that you have the most up-to-date information on what's happening with the negotiations. Ensure that you have a clear place where you can call members of Congress to take action with you. And we're asking you to take action because the last stimulus package passed by Congress did not care for all American families. It neglected a lot of folks. And this pandemic has made it clear now more than ever that our health and well-being is connected to the health and well-being of all of our neighbors, of all of us on this call. So immigrant and Latino communities need access to free COVID-19 testing. We need treatment and economic relief. We need the ability to be able to think about this moment and be assured that our families will be well and will be safe and will be healthy. Everyone deserves that opportunity. And in this moment of crisis, it calls for all of us to come together to protect one another, regardless of immigration status. So I know that United We Dream, Presente, Alianza America, the Congress people on this call, and the Congressional Progressive Caucus, we are in it to win it. And we know that this moment is a defining one for all of us. I know that in the last couple of years, we've heard this remark a lot, but I think it bears to repeating that the generations to come will ask us what we did in this moment of this pandemic. Let us make sure that they are proud of the work that we did. Let us make sure that they know that we fought like hell. And let us make sure that they know that Latinos in this country are not alone and we're not going to give up. So muchas gracias. Thank you so much for your work. And I hope that you join us in this fight because though the night is dark, there's a light in the morning. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Greisa. And I want to say thank you to Nancy Treviño, my co-host for this Dispatch from the Front Lines, and to our co-host organizations, Presente.org and Alianza Americas and United We Dream, and all of our speakers, as well as to the members of Congress who are fighting together with the folks on this call, Congresswoman Escobar and Congressman Garcia. We are all in this together. We are grateful for the leadership of the grassroots activists. We are grateful for the leadership of our progressive champions in Congress. And I am so inspired tonight by the fierce advocates on this call, by the sheer intelligence the response and the thoughtfulness of the response. I learned a lot on this call tonight. I hope that the folks who took time out of their evenings to be here did as well. And I want to say thank you from the Congressional Progressive Caucus Center for all that you do and for taking what I know is precious time to share that with us. And I want to turn it back to Nancy to close us out.
Yeah, I also wanted to share the gratitude to all of the leaders who are joining us, all of you who are joining from across the country, submitting questions, raising your concerns, and telling us how you're taking action. Know that you have support and love coming from presente.org. And thank you so much, Congress members, for joining us and taking the questions and really fighting for all of us, Latinx communities and other stakeholders across the country.